So last night I got a very disturbing email from our friends over at Open the Books, a watchdog organization dedicated to tracking how the government blows our tax dollars. The organization has uncovered a bombshell that makes those gender queer books in children's libraries look vanilla. Turns out Governor Newsom's administration is pumping millions of taxpayer dollars into a nonprofit called Gender Spectrum. This nonprofit goes beyond your average gender-bending indoctrination and promotes something called neo-genders. What the hell is a neo-gender? Exactly, it's made up. Included on the list of so-called neo-genders are identifications such as fox gender and autism gender. The nonprofit's underlying mission is to free students from binary gender and encourage young people to invent their own identities and even their own genders. Gender Spectrum also promotes secret gender transitions for students in California and across the country and outlines a gender support plan which excludes parents at the child's request. Some of this starts as early as kindergarten, by the way. But it turns out this partnership between the California Department of Public Health and Gender Spectrum isn't just a one-off thing, but part of a 9-year grant to conduct rigorous evaluation of the nonprofit's professional development programs. This grant program entitles Gender Spectrum to $2,340,000 taxpayer dollars. Now, this all started when Newsom was lieutenant governor and was supposed to end in 2022. But shocker, Newsom's administration more than doubled annual funding and gave Gender Spectrum an extension through June 2026. And the plan is to expand this program to more schools in more states. Now, Open the Books dove deep into Gender Spectrum and uncovered some disturbing presentations like this one from the Gender Spectrum Family Conference in October 2022, wherein their director of training, Carla Pena, explained part of the training program that centers around a student's gender support team. Quote, "We also give this training to school educators and administrators who are working with trans and gender expansive kids, and it's not always the case that caregivers are supportive of their child's gender, their gender journey in that case. If parents are not supportive or if the child is not out, that's not necessarily someone who will be a part of the gender support team." But that's not all. Open the Books also discovered that Gender Spectrum consulted on the national sex education standards cited by none other than our friends over at the CDC for use in schools nationwide. Here are some of those standards published in 2021. Wow. Now, Open the Books, as well as our team here at OutKick, reached out to Gender Spectrum, the California Department of Public Health, and Governor Gavin Newsom's office for comment, but those requests have thus far been ignored. Y'all, this is wild. This is repugnant. This is already taking root inside our education system, and it's not going anywhere if we don't act now. Because this isn't just a California problem. This kind of education is a cancer, a tumor, and it will spread. You know, I warned y'all at the top of the show, and I'll remind you again. If you are able, get your kids out of these kind of schools and into a school, a district, or an educational situation that sets them up to be productive adults, not fox genders, minotaurs, and confused pawns of the left. Time is of the essence. All right, Alex, they are coming for the ceiling fans now. And, you know, they are touting the 17 whole dollars that people could save over the lifetime of the ceiling fan if they just enact these new energy standards. Because apparently, I didn't know this, but ceiling fans are, I guess, a major contributor to climate change and the apocalypse that is currently coming our way. Can you please break this down for me? Ceiling fans, public enemy number one, or not so much?
It's obviously absurd. I think there's an interesting question of how did we get to this point? Like why are our lives being so micromanaged to the point where we're being dictated, here's exactly what ceiling fan you need to use? Because you would think common sense, well, I can judge the ceiling fan that's most cost effective for me, including the one that has the best amount of energy use. It's not true that we want to use as little energy as possible. We want to use as much energy as is beneficial. So often there's a trade-off between how little something energy, like how quote energy efficient something is and how economically efficient it is. Because sometimes you have things that are very expensive, but more energy efficient. So this should obviously be up to us to decide. And this is actually true of all so-called energy efficiency. There's no reason whatsoever in any area of life for the government to dictate energy efficiency. Energy efficiency done properly is just part of economic efficiency, and we're incentivized to be economically efficient because that just means choosing things that are more cost effective. So we've gotten to a point where the government has this fascist totalitarian control over every aspect of our lives in the name of energy efficiency or some kind of efficiency. And it makes it worse. Just look at toilets. Just look at washing machines. Like, so many things are getting worse, even though they should be getting way better, because we have these government dictated efficiency standards. And really, it's not about efficiency. It's about deficiency. They don't believe it's good to use energy, so they want to reduce it in all sorts of different ways. And then they make up these phony things like, oh, you're going to save $17. If I'm going to save $17, why don't you prove it to me and I get to decide for myself?
Yeah, 17 whole dollars. Wow, that's some Bidenomics for you. But, you know, I also want to talk about the debate last week, and I want to talk about Vivek in a moment. But first, I thought it was interesting because one of the questions was set up about climate change, and it was led into by that's what young people reportedly care most about. Young voters care most about climate change. That's worrying to me because I know that there's so much misinformation and manipulation, as you well know, out there shaping this narrative. But I am concerned because young people are naming this as their top issue. So how do we explain to young people the realities of the situation, whether they love the planet and they want to save it or not, to get them to understand that these tyrannical mandates and restrictions and regulations are not what they appear in, I guess, their rose-colored glasses that they see the world in?
I think this is a really important question. Actually, I have a Substack, alexepstein.substack.com, which if people check out, it addresses this exactly. So I'll just give you a summary, which is when people are concerned about climate change, it's really being concerned about climate catastrophe. You need to do two things. And unfortunately, I don't think any of the candidates did this. I think some of the other answers were good, but I don't think any of them directly engaged this. So one is you need to refute the idea of climate catastrophism. Often what you see is people say, oh, there's no climate change, or they'll say, I'm not going to engage the issue at all. And neither of those, or they'll say, oh, it's a huge problem, right? So it's evasion or not addressing it. It's not the right way to do it, or conceding catastrophism. So you can explain, hey, there's a difference between climate impact or climate change on the one hand, which just means we have some impact on climate, with climate catastrophism, which means that we face a catastrophe that needs to be averted by rapidly reducing our CO2 emissions. And what you can show pretty easily is that we're actually safer than ever from climate, because whatever climate changes have occurred, our ability to master climate, so to deal with climate danger, has far outpaced that. And that's very related to fossil fuels, because fossil fuels power all the machines that allow us to irrigate and alleviate drought and build sturdy buildings and power storm warning systems, et cetera. So number one, refute the idea of climate catastrophism and actually show we're having an improvement in climate livability. And then number two, you could add a third, but number two is show actually good alternative energy policies based on energy freedom. So be pro-nuclear, be pro-geothermal, but talk about getting those to reach their full potential by removing all the green obstacles. Point out, for example, President Biden says he wants all this development of green energy, and yet he shut off one of the most promising mining properties in the United States in Minnesota for 20 plus years, having a moratorium on it. So I think you can show both climate catastrophism is a fiction, and pro-freedom people are the ones who are actually going to get us those alternative energies in a way that they scale at low cost, so China and India actually use them. The third thing that you pointed out is also very important, and this came up with Vivek, and he got in so much trouble for this, even though he's completely right, is pointing out that these climate change policies, what he called bad climate change policies, are far more destructive than any actual climate change. So I think that's an important point. I'm happy to discuss that.
Yeah, we actually have that clip that you're referencing. So let's play it for those who haven't seen it, and then I want your take on it. Let's roll it.
I can offer clear evidence that the number of climate disaster-related deaths is down by 98% over the last century. The number of people who died of hurricanes, tornadoes, heat waves, and other weather-related events in 1920, for every 100 that died then, 2 die today. And the reason why is more plentiful, abundant access to fossil fuels and technology powered by fossil fuels.
Alex, it sounds like he's read your books. It sounds like he is well versed in all things Alex, because you've been telling me this for years.
Yeah, he's definitely read the book. He's publicly talked about that, and I think he internalized it well. What preceded this, I found fascinating. It really shows how unscientific and dogmatic the climate catastrophe community is. So you have Andrea Mitchell repeating the same thing that was on PolitiFact and other things, which they say there are 2 million extreme weather deaths since 1970, and they are caused by climate change that has been made worse by fossil fuels. Notice how weaselly that is, how vague it is, how it's been made worse. But let's note something. 2 million deaths in 50 years. That's 40,000 deaths a year. And that's getting at what Vivek and I are saying, which is that climate-related disaster deaths are down. And by the way, there were more in the 70s than there are today. So what the stat actually shows is climate-related disaster deaths are at record lows. We sometimes used to have 3 million deaths a year, not even adjusted for population, in the 20s and 30s. So as Vivek said, we're 1/50th as likely to die from a climate-related cause, yet these numbskulls can't even understand the stupid data that they are parroting. And then, of course, they're blaming it all on fossil fuels. So we would have 0 deaths without fossil fuels. I mean, this is just so insane, but they're just totally evading this decline in climate-related disaster deaths. And I'm really glad that we have a presidential candidate who's talking about this, because people were paying attention, but the mainstream media got to evade this, because why would they interview me? Why would they interview Schellenberger? Why would they interview Bjorn Lomborg, Steve Koonin, anyone who actually knows what they're talking about? But when there's a prominent presidential candidate saying it, they can't evade him. And yet he's saying what we've been saying for years, and they have no answer. They have these idiotic talking points that on their own are absurd, but they've never thought about the issue to know enough that they're absurd. So he says we have a massive decline in climate-related deaths. She says you have 40,000 deaths a year from climate, as if that's a refutation and as if they're all based on fossil fuels.
What's interesting to me as well is some of these liberals who claim that climate change activism is so important to them, especially these pundits on mainstream media. You know, Florida is being hit with a hurricane really as we speak, and I can't imagine what any of these pundits or any of the people in Florida would feel like if they didn't have fossil fuels to protect them, to get out of the path of the storm, to power the hotels and wherever they need to be, the gas-powered vehicles they need to get the hell out of there. I can't imagine if they had to just rely on their granola power to get out of the path of a hurricane. I have a feeling their tune might change, and I think you're exactly right about that, which brings me to my next point, because I have to get your take on it, and that's Maui. So we got, one disaster to the next, but I know that you've been tweeting about it. I know that you've been doing some analysis on it, and, there's been some back and forth on what exactly caused those fires. Obviously, a lot of conspiracy theories out there, but when you see it and you heard that they were blaming climate change, what was your initial reaction?
I mean, my initial reaction is people have no idea how to think about climate disasters. Again, they're totally ignorant of the fact that deaths from these are down. Damages are not up, by the way. Damages are flat from these things, adjusted for inflation. So what's going on with Maui is the same thing. And I mentioned my Substack, alexepstein.substack.com. We have a Maui analysis coming out soon, which is, I think, more in-depth and accurate than anything that has been published, which isn't much, actually, because everything is totally inaccurate. So what is the effect of global climate change on the local conditions in Maui that may or may not have made it more susceptible to wildfires? We really have no idea. Anyone who claims to know this with specificity is a charlatan. What we do know is the thing that makes by far the biggest difference with dangerous wildfires is wildfire management. And above all, how do you manage the fuel load, which is the amount of fuel that you have that's actually burnable. So Hawaii is a place that has had, particularly Maui, has had a lot of kind of new invasive grasses as they got out of sugarcane production, which was irrigated. They have all this dry grass. And there were many, many people sounding the alarm. Hey, you need to do something about this. You actively need to manage it. But it wasn't a priority. If you look at their website, it's not on their website, but they talk about like being green and all this kind of stuff and saving wetlands. They're not worried about saving humans from wildfires. So all these proposals to actually deal with the problem were set aside. At the same time, they've been spending a fortune on green energy, which that takes money away both from wildfire management and from maintaining power lines, which are a crucial ignition source. And then they also mismanaged the water, and all the good water proposals were thrown out because they're so focused on being green. So it's really green policies make you terrible at managing wildfires, because green means don't impact things. But to manage wildfires, you need to impact a lot. So this is a total failure of green policies. And they're advocating green policies as the solution, which just means more expensive energy, less ability to deal with wildfires, and no learning from the experience.
Yeah, you're exactly right about that. You know, we knew that they were going to blame climate change. So that's the easiest thing for uneducated people to do, is just spit out a talking point, or spit out something that seems like it encompasses all. You know, anytime you throw out climate change, people just go, oh, okay, that's it, and they move along, and they don't actually dig into the real issues, because that takes a little bit of work. But I'm so glad that you have always done that, giving us the truth. We always appreciate your take, Alex, and I hope everyone will check out your Substack and, of course, follow you on Twitter so they can combat the climate alarmists. Appreciate you as always.
Thank you. And just when people say climate change is responsible, just imagine if they said witches are responsible, because it's just about as plausible that there's one evil in the world that is responsible for everything bad. And thanks for giving me the opportunity to share the truth on your shows over the years.
Well, if there is a witch responsible, I think her name is Hillary Clinton, but that's a discussion for another day. Thanks so much, Alex.
Thank you.